When it comes to migration and displacement, no level of government bears the weight like local governments do. From fostering inclusion and social cohesion to balancing shared flourishing, cities across the globe are encountering economic, political, and social challenges and opportunities that stem from migration. So how can cities implement effective responses to migration and displacement? Hi, everyone. This is One Question, a podcast brought to you by Stanford University's Institute for Advancing Just Societies, exploring big questions about what it takes for us to live together in a world where diversity is a fact of life. My name is Tomas Jimenez, and I'm the faculty director of the Institute for Advancing Just Societies, where we drive solutions-focused research and partnership for racial and ethnic justice. Today, we're joined by Samer Saliba, Director of City Practice at the Mayor's Migration Council. Samer leads a global team providing technical assistance and financial resources for cities to design and implement locally led responses to migration and displacement with global impact. Samer, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Tomas.
So Samer, when people think of immigration, they think of the nation state. They think of countries with borders and countries either trying to prevent people from coming in or letting a select few people enter and potentially stay. But the Mayor's Migration Council focuses on cities and mayors. So I wonder if we can start there. Why cities and why mayors?
Ooh, great. Well, I mean, the Mayor's Migration Council focuses on cities because migration is happening in cities, both migration and displacement. And this is not a new phenomenon, although it's certainly increased as the global population has increased and more people find themselves on the move. An estimated 70% of displaced people live in urban environments, and 1 in 5 international immigrants live in just 20 international global cities. And so you're seeing more and more people move, but B, they're moving to cities. And the Mayor's Migration Council was founded in 2018 by mayors for mayors because they were historically left out of the conversation that was being led, as you know, Tomas, it's not just viewed as a national phenomenon, it's led by national and international actors. And so because migration was happening in cities, we felt that it was important, the mayors that we work with felt it was important for them to have a say in how global migration is managed and the goals and policies that guide and govern the globe's response to international migration and displacement. So we were founded on that basic principle, which is, nothing for us without us. And because migration is happening in cities, mayors should have a say on how it's managed.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about how MMC works. Talk to us about its basic approach.
First and foremost, as I mentioned, we're led by city governments, we're led by mayors. Mayors are our primary constituency, they're our primary client. So we're led by leadership mayors. This includes mayors from Freetown, Sierra Leone, from Milan, Italy, from Amman, Jordan, from these different places who are really coming together, looking to not only lead on migration issues in their own city, but demonstrate what global leadership looks like. And under the auspices of their leadership, we implement what we view as the elevator model, which is elevating mayoral voices up, as I mentioned at the start, into international and national decision-making processes. Think of the UN space here, think of regional conversations, trying to, and succeeding in our first 7 years of existence, getting mayors a seat at the table so that they can influence the decisions that are affecting their cities. That's the up button. The down button, which is what me and my team focus on, is bringing resources down to the city level so that mayors and their city governments can continue to support migrants and displaced people living in their cities. Cities around the world are doing this work day in, day out because they have to, but they lack the financial resources and the technical resources to do so at the scale that is necessary. Just 1.2 of international humanitarian funding reaches local actors, and that includes city governments, so cities are receiving less than that. And a fraction of climate finance reaches cities as well. And that affects their ability to manage climate migration, which, as many of your listeners may know, is projected to be the largest driver of human mobility into the future, given the effects of global warming, etc. So that's the basic premise, right? Like bring mayor voices up into international national decision making, and bring financial and technical resources down to city governments so they can better help migrants, refugees, and receiving communities who are in their cities.
So what have you seen are some of the most effective or innovative or instructive approaches that have emerged from the work that you all are doing with mayors on the ground?
I think, at the risk of being too unspecific, the number one advice I give to cities is we have to be proactive, not reactive, right? I think because migration is managed, particularly from a border perspective, from the national government, cities are always reacting to the national policies. But many cities have been shaped by migration for decades, for centuries even in some cases. And so leaning into that, and taking a more proactive stance to welcoming new arrivals in the long term, while also providing for long-standing immigrant communities, is the frame that many mayors are already taking, and we encourage many mayors to continue to take. Not just respond to what's happening at the national level, but focus on what you can do proactively at the local level. Now, what can you do? First and foremost, it's shared prosperity, and it's getting people working, quite frankly, and taking care of their families. The largest driver of migration is a pull factor to cities as economic engines, where cities are generating, I think, 80% of the global GDP. So that's a pull factor already. People are coming to cities not to ask for a handout, but to work and provide for their families. So starting with that, first and foremost, we support over 30 cities now. We fund over 30 cities through our Global Cities Fund for migrants and refugees. Most cities are asking for funding for livelihoods programs, because they understand that not only do migrants and displaced people want to work, but getting them to work actually generates economic benefit for the cities at large. Mm-hmm. That's number one. And number two is making sure that their families are taken care of as well, right? Like this is the education, this is the housing, this is the healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. We often say that cities are already fantastic multitaskers, way more than any international NGO or hyper-focused community group. They are already working on the multitudes of these issues. And so all they need to do is ensure that migrants and displaced people can have access to the basic services that they are already providing.
I wonder if you can take us inside some of the cities that you work with and talk a little bit about the Mayor's Migration Council's work and how it's showing up in a couple of examples.
Sure. Well, I mean, the thing that I'm working most closely on is our Global Cities Fund for migrants and refugees. It started off as a $1 million fund for 5 cities responding to COVID-19, because many migrants and refugees were falling through social safety nets within cities, because they just weren't eligible for those health protections, those social protections as other residents. And so what started off as an experiment with Freetown, Mexico City, Beirut, Lima, and Barranquilla in Colombia has now grown to 34 cities across many different themes, not just public health, but economic inclusion, climate, children and caregivers, housing, and we just announced a new cohort. We announced the selection or funding for a new cohort focused on sport for inclusion, which we're very excited about, working with the Olympic Refuge Foundation. Right. And so just through that alone, right, like 34 cities, we've gotten $5 million in grants out the door, and those cities have enacted programs that are now up to $30 million of funding and financing all locked for them to continue their projects. 90% of our cities that we grant to have continued their projects after our grant term ends. So this is the reason I'm kind of getting into the financing, is because it's such a core mission of ours to talk about the resourcing, that down button that I talked about, because cities are so historically marginalized from the funding and the financing that they need to welcome the majority of the world's migrants and refugees. And so they're doing this work already, and through our Global Cities Fund, through our advocacy, and through other programs we have at the MMC, we've proven that if you give money to cities, they can scale it. I'll give you a specific example. In Medellin, Colombia, a city that has around 100,000 Venezuelan asylum seekers and displaced people, they had an existing temporary housing project that was addressing people living in situations of homelessness, where they could rapidly, you call a phone number, the city government comes, picks you up, puts you in temporary housing, happens in a day. With our funding, they expanded that service to Venezuelan refugees, again, lowering a wall, right? And of the 240 families that were provided temporary housing for the period of 3 months, 90% of those families found permanent housing on their own accord because the city could provide wraparound services to support them in those 3 months. Employment support, language support, helping them register for temporary protected status if they were eligible and hadn't registered yet, right? Again, goes back to this idea of cities as multitaskers. There's countless examples of this. Health clinics in Beirut, employment projects in Barranquilla, dignified and voluntary relocation projects in Hargeisa, Somaliland, or Beira, Mozambique, green job creation in Nairobi or in Arua, Uganda, working hand in hand with refugee communities in Kampala to create jobs. I mean, the list goes on. And I'm so proud of the cities we work with, but so thankful that we have like all of this evidence to show what cities can do with just a drop of funding, and how they can really expand that to continue the work that they're already doing on behalf of all of us, quite frankly.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about research. So Mayor's Migration Council provides financial support, but cities are doing work with that financial support, as you mentioned, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the technical assistance that you provide and how mayors are using the research and the technical assistance you provide, and then also kind of on the back end what we learn from places like Medellin and some of the other cities that you mentioned.
Yeah, so I think because cities are so under-resourced and working to support these communities day in, day out, rightly so, they tend to be more head down. One of the things that we can do is help them be a bit more head up and see what other cities are doing and help them learn from other cities, not just from the technical perspective, but also from the leadership perspective. We have something called the Mayors of the Americas Task Force on Migration, which my colleague Maggie Powers leads, where we're bringing together mayors from the Americas to both compare lessons around leadership, as well as compare lessons around what's working in terms of one-stop shops or using digital tools to verify the credentials of new arrivals who may be coming with skills but don't have the means to verify those skills. Or even in some cases, we're working on a project where a city might have people who need work and can't find it in that city. A city has employers who are looking for employees and can't find those employees, and then literally matching those cities together, which is very hard to do. But we're trying to do that, the legwork to get these cities to understand each other's needs and if there's any opportunity to work together. I think through that, particularly in the regional approach, because they're sharing so many of the same context and migration flows and et cetera, we're really learning a lot about the power of collaborative action, collaborative leadership, and also collaborative technical knowledge and technical exchange. And that has been going on for 2 years now, and the early results are quite promising.
What distinguishes cities that successfully move out of the kind of reactive mode, or maybe never get into the reactive mode, and cities that are always in the reactive mode? So what distinguishes the proactive cities from the kind of reactive ones?
Cities are shaped by three things. Urban growth happens three ways, right? It either happens by increase in natural growth, like more babies are being born. They physically expand their boundaries. That's like the literally moving the goalposts, or immigration. And immigration is I think by far the largest driver of urban growth, and it has been since humankind existed, right? So that is just the reality. I mean, like, migration shapes cities. And in turn, I think cities can shape the future of what civilization and society looks like. I know that's like a bold statement, but I want us to get out of this mindset of migration being so polarized and so political, when it is just this thing that happens and is such a driver of economic growth and shared prosperity, and results in you having the food that you want to eat, or the access to caregivers that your kid needs, or just like diversifying the education of your 5-year-old or your 10-year-old or your 15-year-old. Like I'm putting this in the most basic day-to-day terms because we've just lost the thread of viewing it in that frame. Now, let me not completely ignore the premise of your question. Like, there are many cities, and I think it mostly happens when there's a large influx that happens very rapidly. I'm thinking of 30,000 Syrians and Afghans living on the streets of Paris in just the month of October 2016, right? 200,000 asylum seekers being bused or coming on their own volition to New York City over the course of a couple of months 2 years ago, right? Like that's serious stuff that's happening, right?
Wow.
But even in those cases, the mayor of Paris established temporary shelter, even though it wasn't in her jurisdiction. And the city of New York spent more money than I think they should have, but I had conversations with them about that, to make sure that they're standing by their right to shelter policy and making sure that all those people had a roof over their heads. And then I can get into a conversation about like, hey, look, you did this great thing responding to the immediate need. Now, how can you extend that in terms of like providing language access in these temporary shelters or providing wraparound services like Medellin did so that people aren't just exactly back to square one when they get out or when they move on to the next place. And that's that sort of building the bridge between the reactive and the proactive that we try to advocate for cities. And again, many of them are already doing on their own volition.
Yeah, no, we when we first launched the initiative, and it was less of a kind of workshop format than the one that you participated in. We had David Holt, who's the mayor of Oklahoma City, and Julian Castro, who's former mayor of San Antonio, secretary of Housing and Urban Development. We had them in a moderated conversation. The thing that came up over and over again is that mayors are problem solvers. And David Holt, I should mention, is Republican, and Julian Castro, of course, is a Democrat. He ran, Democratic ticket for president. And they kept repeating over and over again, and really only after realizing how much they agreed with each other, that mayors are problem solvers. They tend to be less partisan, and that as you pointed out, the kind of scope of membership is the city. And so, the federal level can kind of dictate who's a citizen and who's not, and who's documented and who's not. But people live in cities, their lives are in cities, their kids are going to schools there, they're working there, they're going to local parks, they're using local services, contributing to the local economy. So, people's lives are kind of happening locally. And so just kind of double clicking on that idea that, or I should say underlining that idea that mayors are addressing challenges and housing opportunities that are kind of in their backyard. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about where things get tough. And so, when you look at city-led efforts, do you see patterns in where they tend to stall out, even when there's a political will and even when there's some resources? Where do things get stuck?
Things are tough right now for sure, but I also think that mayoral leadership on migration is having a moment, and it's more relevant than it ever has before, because exactly what you're saying, Tomas, right? Like, they're showing both political leadership and pragmatic leadership, and they have to. I often think of, newly elected Mayor Mamdani, standing up for immigrant communities, putting out videos in Haitian Creole, talking about the potential rollback of temporary protective status for Haitians, and then back-to-back snowstorms hit, and he's out there with a shovel, like digging out Hasidic communities in Brooklyn, right? Like that is the spectrum of being a mayor, right? Like standing up for your communities in the most practical ways, and sometimes even political ways. Finding that balance is quite difficult. I think a lot of American mayors are actually doing it quite well these days. I'm thinking of Mayor Wu in Boston. I'm thinking of Mayor Johnston in Denver, and Mayor Mamdani in New York. We work quite closely with Mayor Wu. We're funding the city of Boston through the Global Cities Fund, and Mayor Johnston is on our leadership board. But they're quite effective of not making it a political conversation. They'll get. Both Mayor Johnston and Mayor Wu had to testify in front of Congress for their sanctuary cities policies. That was billed as a gotcha moment from Congress, but then, they showed up there and Mayor Wu said, immigrants are making my city more safe, not less safe. Here's all the evidence why. And it actually ended up being a leadership moment for them, more than a moment where they came under attack and couldn't defend themselves, because they had the evidence to back it up, and because they didn't, play the game of politics, right? It's not about right or left. It's not about Republican, Democrat. It's just about, what does my community need? How can I move my city forward? And that's either going to be, putting out effective communications in Haitian Creole, or picking up a shovel if I need to, right? Like, the political context makes it harder than it needs to be right now.
So I can imagine, some political elites, mayors among them, but in particular constituents, people who are, longtime residents of a place, listening to this conversation and thinking, like, why don't we do this for the people who've been here for a long time?
Yeah.
Right. There's a kind of economic nationalism that can appear at the local level without kind of thinking that I could anticipate your answer. Like, I wonder how you'd react to that. And I, again, this is not getting into politics. This is trying to really just see where the kind of, the benefits lie for the kind of work that you do, and whether those are really particular or more broad-based benefits.
I think what I'd say is, just as migration has shaped the past, migration will shape the future. And providing for new arrivals in a way that makes sense for everybody is smart urban planning, and it's good business for city economic development. Getting into the specifics of how requires like an examination of context by context. But that's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument, I think, is people who want to attack democracy and divide our societies will come for immigrants first. They're kind of like the first point of entry. And you see that across the world, and you see that across history, going back to Shakespeare's days in England, right? Like, so that's a common political ploy, is to gain power by attacking and victimizing, or villainizing rather, the lowest rung, the most marginalized. I don't want to use the word vulnerable, but the most marginalized among societies. That happens to be the person who arrived to the city with just one suitcase, like my parents did when they came to Boston in 1979 from Beirut, Lebanon. And so that's why I encourage cities, again, to like, and people who care about this, to take the long view of like, these are our neighbors. Getting along with them is in everybody's best interest. Providing them with opportunities to give back is in everybody's best interest. And I truly believe that a rising tide lifts all ships, and to lift that tide, you need to start with the most marginalized. It's not about ignoring other vulnerabilities. And the most effective city policies are not just focused on migrants and refugees. They're expanding to include migrants and refugees, and strengthening the overall program through that expansion, because they're adapting to make sure that the most marginalized among us can access it. All of that can only be good can only contribute to the greater good. Now, is that an effective argument? I'm working on that myself. So hope, and that's why, like, I think narrative change, and we talked about this in Stanford at the workshop, and so many cities in California and others are doing good work on this. Like, I think the conversation, like getting into the conversation, is one of the next program areas that we really want to develop the narrative change work, so that we can, take all the evidence and all the learning that we have and put it into effective arguments. Both for ourselves as an organization, but also for our mayors, because we need to get the conversation back on track. It's not going in a productive direction.
Yeah, and I think what you're capturing is the notion that for some people, and it's just I think there's a human tendency to think that if there is some kind of benefit or some kind of focus on one population, it ignores another. If they're getting something, that means we're not getting something.
Yeah.
I think what I hear you saying is that a lot of the policies that benefit migrants benefit everyone, and not even in a kind of downstream way. That good schools, public safety, people having access to local government. Those are all things that are great for communities, regardless of whether people have been there for generations or they're newly arrived. And then there's some other things that are more specific to migrants and displaced people that really make for a thriving community, because you don't have a population that you live among, speaking now from the perspective of, say, a multi-generational resident, that is, that can't contribute. They don't have the opportunity to contribute. That is kind of, on the margins, geographically and socially. So
Yeah.
that's what that's.
No, and I think like it's you're putting it in economic terms too, right? Like here we're here in New York City. In the U.S., foreign-born people are more likely to be successful entrepreneurs, contribute to local taxes even if they're undocumented. In New York City, there's something like 45% foreign-born small businesses, but contributing to more than 50% of the city's GDP, right? Like, again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. They're coming to contribute. They're not coming to ask for a handout. And I think we lost that truth somewhere along the line.
Let's talk a little bit about immigrant inclusion. So MMC, Mayor's Migration Council, and the Migration Policy Institute, for listeners who don't know, Migration Policy Institute is, I think, the preeminent global think tank on migration in the world. You recently came out with a report on economic inclusion, outlining some of the challenges and then laying out a lot of the opportunities, and including some of the opportunities that Mayor's Migration Council network mayors have kind of put forth. And so I wonder if you can just give us some of the highlights from that report, and maybe pluck out some of the things that really captured your attention.
Yeah, well, thanks for you teed me up in an earlier research question to bring up my most recent report. So thanks for bringing that back, because I missed that opportunity, Tomas. I appreciate it. But no, we were very happy to recently launch a report with MPI focusing on city-led economic inclusion, which is different than just broad economic inclusion. So it's really like, what can cities do specifically? There's so much in that report, and I'm very proud of the fact that it is a global report. First and foremost, it captures so many different city actions, from St. Louis in the U.S. to very more rural cities in Ethiopia, right? All of that is kind of captured. I think the report, one of the things that resonates with me in the report is the focus on long-term economic inclusion. It's not just about getting a job contract. It's about sustaining that employment to good and securing good, decent jobs. So much of my world, the humanitarian development world, focuses on migrant and refugee entrepreneurship because it tends to be the lowest barrier to entry. You don't have to worry about the private sector. Sometimes you don't even have to worry about formal, a lot of that can happen in the informal economies. That's all great, but we also have to think about the greater potential that migrants and refugees can bring if they're able to scale those businesses, if they're able to, and by scale I mean literally employ other people, not just be self-employed. If they're able to fill gaps within economies, and if they're able to usher in new types of how societies are going to work in the future, right? Like leveraging AI, digital workforces, things like that. I'll give you a specific example. We're doing a lot of work on labor mobility, which is literally bringing people from outside the country into countries to fill gaps. Very hard to do from a city-led perspective, but the city of Turin in Italy is leveraging an Italian law, and again, people often think of the current Italian government as far-right anti-immigrant, but this is an existing law that allows refugees to be formally employed within Italy. And because Turin has an aging population, they have gaps in basic public sector jobs like bus drivers, right? There's other sectors like goldsmithing and others. But specifically, they're working with organizations and cities in Uganda to identify refugees in Uganda, not Ugandans, right? Like Somalis, Congolese, etc., to be hired in Uganda, get their butt on a plane, which I always say these projects are about butts on planes, and they're landing in Turin with a job contract in hand. And they can immediately start working, and there's 3 to 6 months of support just to make sure they land on their feet, but they're coming and they're immediately contributing. And that's a fantastic example that we're starting to try to stand more examples of in other regions. And I love that example, and it's getting a lot of attention because it's in Italy and it's happening in Europe, and and it has strong connections specifically to refugee resettlement as well.
So I wonder where you see opportunities for collaboration between cities. We've talked about research, so between cities, researchers, policy institutions, philanthropy. Like, where do you see the greatest promise for impact that would come from a collaboration between all of those kind of sectors, or even just a couple of them?
Yeah, I think my short answer is research that leads to solutions, right? I think a lot, and the MPI report gets into this a lot about like cities keep asking for data about how many people we need or how many migrants are living in our city, et cetera, et cetera. And I tend to push back on that. It's not about how many migrants are living in your city. It's how many people with skills are living in your city. What skills are they bringing? And not just what their needs are, but what are their aspirations, right? Like asking them those kinds of questions, because yeah, your city is big and there's a lot of people who live in them. Like what does having 10,000 versus 5,000 people, like what does that change for your thinking? But if I tell you you have, 5,000 doctors versus 10,000 doctors, that changes things, right? Like, and that's where actionable information. So just that kind of solutions and this is like our green jobs data, that's why I'm proud of that work. Which again, my colleague Maggie really led, because it sort of highlights like, look, this is the direction this goes, and we need these types of solutions to unlock this economic potential. So that's one, and then another one is just what's the future of all of this, right? Like we're actively thinking about the next step for economic inclusion research. And I kind of want to ask you the same question. So it's like, where do you feel like, like there's interesting use cases of using AI. Actually, your colleagues at the Immigration Policy Lab with IPL, is that it? Yep. Are using the tool GeoMatch to tell people like, hey, look, based on your answers to these 10 questions, these are the 10 cities that would best be suited, ranked based on we'll do the ranking for you, and it's up to you to buy the ticket and go there, right? Like those kinds of tools again are more solution oriented, more future leaning, and I'm excited by those kinds of prospects rather than how many mouths do we need to feed, et cetera, et cetera. I really don't want to belittle that work. I come from the humanitarian cloth, like that's what I'm cut from. I fully understand the need, and like the gaps that we have in funding, the gaps that we have in malnutrition, like et cetera, et cetera. Those are real global problems. But that's not where we're focused on. Like we're focused on the future and research that paves a better path towards that future.
Yeah, I appreciate the plug for the Immigration Policy Lab's research, and for listeners, you can go to the Immigration Policy Lab's website to learn about GeoMatch, which I think is actually kind of a data-driven tool to do some of the things that you've talked about, including what's happening in Boston and Turin, or at least it's based on the same principle that we can do a better job of finding a place where in this case refugees are most likely to be successful, and that's going to be a value add to the communities in which they settle. And if we can do a better job of placing them, then everyone will be better off. So this is I appreciate this perspective about it's not just how many, it's who and what do we do with the who and the context in which they could potentially settle.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that there was a kind of down button and an up button that corresponded to Mayor's Migration Council's work. And we've been talking about the work on the ground for the most part, and that would be the down button. And I want to press the up button for a second and ask you about scaling. You have, and scaling, I guess, horizontally, but also potentially vertically. And the horizontal scale would be across cities, either in your network or not. And you've given some examples where cities have kind of gotten together and collaborated. But maybe let's think about the horizontal scale. Like, are there ways in which you can see the work that's happening in MMC's network being scaled up to the federal level, where a national government would say, oh my God, I love what they're doing. in this city, and we should be doing that, or at the very least supporting more of that work.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I'm saying is like we really see the promise in cities working quite closely with their national governments and UN agencies to bring about a shared vision of welcoming migrants and refugees in a way that helps everybody prosper, right? Like this is what the global compacts are about. At the UN level, the global compact for migration and the global compact on refugees. So those are sort of, when we were founded, those were our guiding light, right? Like to say that cities are fast tracking the global compacts, which are non-binding but globally agreed documents at the UN level. Now with the UN sort of losing steam, to put it nicely, we're thinking about other ways, and this is where things like the Mayors of the Americas Task Force on Migration comes into play, where how cities can actually work together and put out things like action agendas or regional asks to their national governments, do so collectively so that there's commonality and shared voice, and try to engender that more effective collaboration with, between Bogota and the government of Colombia, between Denver and the U.S. government, even in some cases, right? Like, and we still think that that's possible, quite frankly. Not at the big picture, obviously, like the politics are what they are, but if you focus on the specific asks and the specific opportunities to align on effective management, I do think that there's a lot of opportunities there. And we know this from, under Biden administration, the Biden White House's executive order on climate migration, which came out in 2020, my whole timeline is so off these days. 23, 24, who knows? That was influenced by us and by the cities that we work with, right? To really identify that climate migration is happening in cities, and so that was a nice win for us. Obviously, everything changed a few months later, but like we still have that example that we can lean on and hope to have other examples in other places. The International Migration Review Forum just happened here in New York. At the UN, and the government of Brazil was very open to made positive comments publicly about managing migration effectively and working with cities in that way. So we look for those opportunities and try to align with them as best as possible.
Great. So it's already happening, happening, and then there's potential for more. So I want to ask you this last question that I ask every one of our guests, and it's built on the premise that universities are not institutions of higher knowing, they're institutions of higher learning. And that learning requires curiosity. And so on the theme of our podcast, which is one question, I wonder what is one question that's occupying your curiosity right now?
It's a bit philosophical, but it's, why are we expecting different outcomes for other people that are different than the outcomes that we expect for ourselves? And that's what my PhD research is focused on. It's more focused on the history of refugeeism, starting all the way from the 1920s up until now, and this idea that refugees are a problem to be solved. And I question that. I question why we view refugees as a problem to be solved, and why we stop short of, giving them, you have a roof over your head and you have food on your plate, therefore you are no longer our problem. Where more so, most displacement happens for over 10 years. My own family, left Beirut and never went back. And so if we view it in that perspective, right, like how do we get people back to the promise of their lives in the same way that we view the promise of our own lives? So that's kind of the philosophical question. I'm habiting into the specifics of my methodology and then like how we will actually hope to answer. That's not my specific research question, but that's the meta question that's guiding it.
I appreciate it. That's a question for us to ponder offline, and for our listeners to ponder as they go away from this conversation. Samer Saliba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Thomas.
One Question is brought to you by Stanford's Institute for Advancing Just Societies. Produced by Ethography. Producers Georgia Limcalco and Nicholas Leapins. With music by Caleb Liu. This episode was edited by Declan Franey.